In 1056 the wind is unpredictable and the rain is not smooth. Emperor Renzong of Song still has no children and is seriously ill. This year Qing was dismissed, Bao Zheng took office, Su Shi and his son had just arrived in Beijing, and Sima Guang submitted 3 memorials a year requesting the appointment of the crown prince. This year Zhao Shi wears the same face as Song Renzong coming through time. Keywords of the novel. The song. Shoo, I'm really not the crown prince. No pop-ups, the song. Shoo, I'm really not the crown prince. Download the full text of the text, the song. Shoo, I'm really not the crown prince. Read the latest chapter. Chapter 1. Sudden Crossing and Bao Zheng. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1 Sudden Crossing and Bao Zheng, the Great Song Dynasty. Pooh, big coward. You are a notorious and humiliating regime that has been repeatedly defeated. Why do you compare yourself to me in the prosperous Tang dynasty, a strong man, and a great Ming dynasty? Zhao Shi was angry at his colleague Song fan on his phone. In this era, there are still living Song fans. Must be sprayed. Suddenly a flower in front of me, empty in hand, sees him. Then he heard a roar and was fiercely pressed to the ground. Zhao Shi didn't even know what had happened, so he instinctively struggled twice clanging, a knife almost stuck to the tip of its nose and penetrated into the soil. Isn't my courtyard already hardened with cement? Don't force me. Then, a man in ancient costume, who was about 23 or 4 years old, with a fair face but a scar slanting from his left ear across the corner of his right mouth, appeared somewhat ferocious. He squatted down and said, I wish I could break you into countless pieces. Wrinkled his brow, Zhao Shi rationally chose not to struggle. Can you tell me the reason? Scarface hasn't spoken yet, because you are suspected of murdering and hanging a corpse. There was another voice coming from behind, with footsteps, heavy and slow. It should be an elderly and somewhat stubborn person who walked over and introduced himself. I am the newly appointed magistrate of Kaifeng Prefecture, Bao Zheng. Bao Zheng. Zhao Shi instinctively wanted to turn his head to look, but with a slap, he was pushed back by his scarred face. He didn't hide his disgust and said, I told you, don't force me, otherwise, I can't guarantee that you, such a filthy person, can walk out alive. Zhao Shi pursed his lips, no pressure, just, who are you, the deceased? Scarface hesitated for a moment, then listened to Zhao Shi calmly say, I don't quite believe that you are a good police officer who is impartial and resentful of evil. A good constable. So, if you were to be so angry, the deceased must have some connection with you. Scar awkward twitching, Bao Zheng became interested and said, why can't he be a good constable who hates evil like an enemy? Zhao Shi moved his position slightly, although his face was still mostly pressed in the soil, he felt a little more comfortable. Then he replied, firstly, if he is a good constable who hates evil like an enemy, then he should follow the process, ask his name, explain his purpose, and then arrest him, rather than just casually pressing me to the ground as soon as he came up. Bao Zheng frowned slightly. The song didn't have this process, but if he added a good word, he couldn't really be considered a good constable who hates evil as if he were an enemy. And then. Secondly. Zhao Shi took the opportunity to slightly adjust his posture and said, he is not a bad constable who hates evil like an enemy. Of course, it may also be because he is afraid of you, a new official, taking office 3 times, so he has restrained himself a bit. However, he neither followed the process nor stabbed me to death with a single blow, but repeatedly and openly revealed his killing intent. What does this mean? He is related to the deceased. Bao Zheng looked at the back of Zhao Shi's head, which had been pinned to the ground by 7 or 8 people, and was somewhat surprised. He grabbed people with anger, he said, so. Zhao Shi stopped making small movements and twists. He was a very rational person, whether it was really time traveling or that colleague Song fan who had the ability to play games. In front of more than a dozen knives, the most he could do was to make himself comfortable, rather than struggling violently. So, what is your relationship with the deceased? Scarface bit his teeth and even clenched the knife, but in the end, he didn't do anything more. He said with some frustration, "He's my younger brother, and I worked hard in the worry-free cave." Fine work. Not long after taking office, Bao Zheng was also surprised to hear this news for the first time, and then he looked at Zhao Shi lying on the ground with even more surprised, even a bit stunning eyes. "What a smart kid," he said, unaware that Zhao Shi had just experienced an incredible journey. Otherwise, Zhao Shi's calmness was indeed somewhat abrupt. "Can I take a look at the body?" Bao Zheng remained silent. In theory, this was impossible. After all, Scarface clenched his knife and said, "Look at the body. What if you escape? Besides, who knows if you are the murderer and then pretend to be calm and intelligent in front of us?" Zhao Shi was about to explain. Bao Zheng remained silent for a moment, but inexplicably looked forward to it. Let him see. Moreover, for some unknown reason, he always felt that the sound gave him an inexplicable sense of familiarity. The governor. Scar turned his head, a bit reluctant, but after looking at Bao Zheng's expression, he nodded. After all, he had not taken office much earlier than Bao Zheng and had no capital to resist. However, although he could not resist, he still had some temper. "Get up." Scarface almost rudely pulled Zhao Shi up and then pushed him hard, leaving Zhao Shi with no chance to even glance at Bao Zheng, causing him to fall back 2 steps. "Have you really traveled?" Zhao Shi was not fixated on whether it was Bao Zheng in history or in romance. He turned his head and looked around. It was truly a time of travel, and there were no signs at all. While talking on the phone, he came from his own small courtyard to such a messy and dilapidated courtyard with weeds and weeds. Still, wearing it. Wearing clothes has its advantages over soul wearing, such as there's no need to take the blame for the original owner. If Zhao Shi says he's not the murderer, then he definitely isn't. For example, the soul and body naturally fit together, without the need for adaptation, but it also has its drawbacks, especially in the current situation where Zhao Shi is considered a suspect. The most obvious thing is no household registration. Indeed, ancient times may not have reached the level where it is difficult to travel without an ID card. However, ancient times did not mean that one could go anywhere they wanted. Zhao Shi did not have any guidance, evidence, land deeds, or origins. He was a black man. If this was not the case when traveling, he might still be able to find a way to slowly recover, and once traveling, he was surrounded by constables. It made him frown a bit, although he always believed that he had much stronger psychological resilience than his peers who were also 16 or 17 years old. Hurry up. Scarface didn't know if his anger had not dissipated or if he had just identified Zhao Shi as the culprit. Seeing Zhao Shi walking a bit slowly, he didn't hesitate to kick him and scolded, "You have the courage to kill, not run away, and act like an innocent person. Do you really think you can deceive everyone?" Zhao Shi clenched his fist. Reasonably, he quickened his pace, but the small courtyard was unexpectedly large. After walking about 180 steps, Zhao Shi finally arrived at the door. Through the collapsed half-door, he really saw a corpse swaying and hanging in the distance. Zhao Shi couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. Can we finally solve the case? Zhao Shi had a mysterious love for criminal investigation since he was young. Perhaps it was because of this that he was admitted to Public Security University despite only 1 year of high school. By the time he traveled, he was already a prospective graduate who had completed 4 years of courses in just 2 years. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Hanging oneself, why is it so complicated? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Hanging oneself, why is it so complicated? The deceased. Male. 21 to 20.3 years old, thin, dressed in rags. There is a burn on the calf, a burn. There is only one strangulation mark on the neck, and it is preliminarily determined that the death was due to insufficient brain oxygen supply, not caused by cervical spine fracture. Although I don't understand, however, Bao Zheng and Scarface looked up together, riding on a tree branch with a piece of white cloth in each hand, carefully examining the body of Zhao Shi. Two words still came to mind: professional, very professional. Damn it, even Bao Zheng felt an unconscious sense of enlightenment, and then watched as Zhao Shi slid from the tree to the ground. Ignoring the deceased's incontinence, he lay on the ground and observed carefully before asking, "What have you gained?" "Hanging oneself." Zhao Shi replied without looking back, then frowned and pinched a handful of moist soil, gently rubbing it with his fingertips. "Hanging oneself." Scared Face suddenly jumped up and said, "Impossible." Then, pointing to the body hanging in the air at least 3 feet, 95.04 cm, high, he cursed angrily, come on, tell me, how can you fucking hang yourself half a person high from the ground?" "Ice cubes." Zhao Shi remains the same, without looking back. "Ice blocks." "Yes." Zhao Shi patted the wet soil under the victim's feet and said, "Because it's just a case of self-hanging incontinence, it's not enough to make the ground so wet. Besides." Zhao Shi stood up and took 2 steps forward, picking up a piece of broken ice and saying, "Even if you could check the crime scene a little before catching me, you shouldn't ask such simple questions." Simple. Scarface is obviously not someone who likes to use his brain. This would be stimulated by Zhao Shi, but instead he used his brain for a moment and then snorted coldly, "Do you know what month and date it is now?" "September 20th. Can you tell me how to find ice cubes before the river freezes?" "There are many ways." The answer was not from Zhao Shi, but from Bao Zheng. Bao Zheng looked at Zhao Shi's back in surprise and then replied, "Not to mention now, it's midsummer, and there are also many wealthy families who store ice cubes. Moreover, even if there is no habit of storage, I have seen a record in an ancient book at the end of the Tang dynasty that it is said that ice cubes can be made with a gray-white stone." That's right, making ice with saltpeter. The use of saltpeter to make ice was discovered by miners in the late Tang dynasty and then shone brightly in the Song dynasty, becoming the main means for many wealthy families to escape the summer heat. However, Bao Zheng should have been relatively frugal, so he used ancient books to record, rather than personal experience. Zhao Shi stood up and took a look at Bao Zheng while explaining to Scarface. In their 60s, face white, without crescent, well, it should be the historical Bao Zheng, who served as the magistrate of Kaifeng Prefecture from December 1056, Jiao Year 1, to June 1058, Jiao Year 3. That's right, he only served as the magistrate of Kaifeng Prefecture for less than 2 years, and now it's September 20th, so, is it now 1057, the second year of Jiao? Zhao Shi's mind slightly deviated, then turned back again, squatted down, and studied the moist soil. How was it transformed? Not only Zhao Shi's doubts, Bao Zheng was even more puzzled, then hesitated for a moment before bowing and saying, "Little Lang, although I have solved the mystery of how to make ice, just as Yang Chuan just said, on September 20th, although it was not enough to freeze the river water, the weather had already turned cold enough to melt the ice. How did this ice melt?" Zhao Shi looked up, looking at the deceased. "Quicklime." Quicklime. Bao Zheng can definitely be considered knowledgeable, but when faced with the words, quicklime, he was still a bit confused. Zhao Shi didn't hide it, which was not too beyond the times. He explained, "That's right, quicklime is similar to saltpeter. Since you know that saltpeter releases a lot of cold when it comes into contact with water, you should also understand that quicklime releases a lot of heat when it comes into contact with water. The problem is, why did he do this?" Bao Zheng felt a little embarrassed and turned his head to look at the more bewildered group of constables. After hesitating for a moment, at the age of 60, the magistrate of Kaifeng Prefecture still bowed and said, "Please help me clarify." Zhao Shi looked quietly at the body. Without any slack in his brow, he asked without looking back, "Do you have anyone with quicklime?" Bao Zheng slowly looked at Scarface, who hesitated for a moment. He awkwardly took a bag from his waist and stuffed it into Zhao Shi's hand, explaining somewhat unnecessarily, Governor Bao, although I carry such sneak attacks with me, I hardly ever use them. I am still quite upright. Unfortunately, the explanation of Scarface was not fully explained, so Zhao Shi just turned his wrist and sprinkled lime powder into a small puddle near his feet that had not completely dried up, and a miracle was born. Like a miracle, in the blink of an eye, Zhao Shi emitted a surge of white air. Bao Zheng was shocked, especially with his scarred face. His eyes widened, and he looked at Zhao Shi incredulously. He then looked at Zhao Shi's back and said, "Is this okay?" Zhao Shi didn't even pay attention to the two of them, he still looked at the body. Keep watching on the surface of the body, there was a little golden light overflowing, but Zhao Shi didn't notice it at all. He just frowned and murmured, "Suicide is suicide. Even if you were forced, you don't have to make it so grand, do you?" Grand. Bao Zheng took 2 steps forward and happened to see Zhao Shi's profile. He inexplicably felt that Zhao Shi's profile was also somewhat familiar, and instinctively wanted to look more carefully. Zhao Shi fiercely patted the slightly burned calf of the body, which was also the reason why Zhao Shi was able to quickly determine the quicklime and ice formation. The method of committing this case is not difficult, and the difficulty lies in why do you do this. Anyone who commits suicide, even if they are forced to do so by some evil force, as long as they decide to commit suicide, they will definitely do it in a simple way, such as hanging themselves. Hanging oneself up only requires lifting 2 stones, stepping on and hanging one at a time, and it will be over. Why make it so grand, like showing off your skills? Although Bao Zheng was not good at adjudicating cases, he was gradually influenced by Zhao Shi and noticed this strange place. Then he stopped and frowned immediately. Zhao Shi and Bao Zheng almost turned their heads at the same time, looking towards the direction the body was facing, which was the small courtyard where Zhao Shi was arrested, or rather, broken temple. Crossing the mottled and collapsed courtyard wall, one can clearly see the overgrown courtyard. On one side of the courtyard, there is also a broken bell hanging. On the side of the broken bell is a palace gate that has been split into 7 or 8 pieces. Then, jumping over the broken palace gate, one can see a Buddha statue whose golden lacquer has been completely peeled off, with one hand facing up and the other hand facing down, your expression pitying the heavens and sympathizing with the people. End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Stone. Lighter. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Stone. Lighter. Search. Without any hesitation, Bao Zheng let out a loud shout and rushed towards the dilapidated temple. His graying beard fluttered with his footsteps, completely unlike an elderly man in his 60s, followed by Yang Chuan with a scarred face, but Yang Chuan ran a few steps forward excitedly, hesitated for a moment, but then stopped and turned back to look at Zhao Shi. Scar twitching, finally, he walked back, bent down, lowered his head, arched his hand over his head, and said, "I'm sorry." This really exceeded Zhao Shi's expectations. After all, the gap in official and civilian status in the northern Song dynasty was even more unreasonable compared to modern times, and he nodded slightly. It's understandable. Perhaps. However, Yang Chuan was also somewhat stubborn, completely ignoring Zhao Shi's understanding. His voice became even louder. "I'm Yang Chuan, the Left Army Inspector of Kaifeng Prefecture. It's too late today, but no matter when you come to find me in the future, I will definitely lend you my all." Zhao Shi's liking grew a bit stronger. "My name is Zhao Shi," he replied. "Zhao." Zhao Shi's eyebrows trembled. It seemed that there was no rule in the northern Song dynasty that the common people could not have the surname of an emperor, right? Alternatively, change your surname. Zhao Shi didn't know his parents' surnames, but his grandfather who adopted him said his surname was Zhao, so he changed his surname to Zhao. Therefore, changing his surname was not a big deal for him, as long as it could save some trouble. However, Yang Chuan just hesitated for a moment and skipped it, so it shouldn't be a big deal. Yang Chuan scratched his head and said, Zhao Shi. I've written it down. I don't have time today, but I will definitely repay you in the future. Say it. He no longer hesitated, turned around and shouted, Everyone, let me turn this ruined temple upside down. He then ran towards the ruined temple. Zhao Shi breathed a sigh of relief. Although there are still many doubts, this case should be considered as having nothing to do with myself. I can leave safely, and then I am about to leave like a stream of light. Zhao Shi finally saw a little golden light floating on the corpse, then falling down and integrating into his left index finger. Really, gold finger. Zhao Shi instinctively took 2 steps closer to the body. What are you doing? Suddenly, someone asked. Zhao Shi's pupils shrank, but fortunately he had a more stable temperament and didn't panic too much. He turned around and saw a 23 or 4-year-old constable wearing clothes similar to Yang Chuan, but with a milder scar face than Yang Chuan's. He introduced himself, Kaifeng Prefecture, Right Army Inspector Chai Wen. Chai. Zhao Shi somewhat understood why Yang Chuan was stunned just now. The surname Chai, in this era, compared to his own national surname, which is even more unique, Chai Wen seemed to have gotten used to hearing his name and was taken aback for a moment. He smiled and said, I have nothing to do with the one who is so secretive. It's you, and the royal family. The same. Zhao Shi smiled and said, just like you, it's purely a coincidence. Oh. Chai Wen nodded and then fixed his gaze on Zhao Shi. He turned to look at the body and asked repeatedly, Did you find anything else? Zhao Shi shook his head, I have said everything with evidence. What about those without evidence? Chai Wen shook his head, not breaking the sand pot and asking to the end. Instead, he sincerely sighed, it's hard to imagine that such a strange, complex, and unsolvable case, in the hands of the young man, has not lasted for a cup of tea time. Zhao Shi smiled with a reserved smile, but was not knocked unconscious by the kind words. He replied, it just happened to hit what I know. That's also very impressive. Chai Wen generously praised and then bowed, saying, Search, there are only a dozen or so of them. One more is not much, and one less is not much. So, I thought to put down this body first. It's not a problem to keep him hanging like this. Zhao Shi turned around to look at the body. Release the body. Monitor me. Although this person smiled mildly, it was clearly much more difficult to deal with than Yang Chuan. Yang Chuan had already let Zhao Shi go, but he didn't expect to be stopped by Chai Wen again. Zhao Shi had no choice but to smile and say, it's okay. Then the two of them put down the body together and tidied up the deceased's appearance. Then Chai Wen looked at the dilapidated temple and said, Did you infer where the body would hide the information? No. Zhao Shi shook his head honestly. He really didn't have much judgment on this. However, when Chai Wen wanted to say something, he had already guessed a little. Sure enough, Chai Wen completely ignored Zhao Shi's words. Still smiling, he said, That's much stronger than us empty-headed people. I see they haven't found it for so long. Why don't you send the Buddha to the west and let's go help find it again? Okay. Zhao Shi smiled and nodded, then followed Chai Wen a few steps towards the dilapidated temple before frowning with force. Zhao Shi should have left long ago. After all, he is a gangster. As long as anyone asks about his background, he will definitely be exposed. However, Yang Chuan and Bao Zheng seem to not care anymore. This Chai Wen is like a dog skin ointment, and Zhao Shi really wants to secretly punch him, but in this way, you really become a thief, not to mention whether you can escape in the future. It's just that you can escape. Zhao Shi was bound to offend Bao Zheng, the official in charge of Kaifeng Prefecture. With Bao Zheng's serious nature, he would never want to enter Kaifeng Prefecture again in the second half of his life. However, when he came to the northern Song dynasty, he could not survive in Kaifeng. Isn't that in vain? A wise brother. In front of the broken temple gate, Chai Wen turned around and asked curiously, What's wrong with you? It's nothing. Zhao Shi restrained his emotions, then crossed the broken wall and looked towards the broken temple. Inside the broken temple a lot of people are busy and enthusiastic, especially Bao Zheng. After all, let's forget about the others. They are young, and that's what they do. However, as a civil servant in his 60s, and with a graying beard, Bao Zheng is even more determined than those who catch and work hard. The old hero has a lofty aspiration for 1,000 miles. Chai Wen also sighed faintly on the side. I have long heard that Mr. Bao has always been a pioneer in his work and is not afraid of dirt and chaos. Originally, I thought this was an exaggeration, but today I see that the rumors are true. Zhao nodded in time. This is actually, although he didn't like the Song dynasty, especially the reign of Emperor Renzong, which was related to his adopted grandfather forcing him to memorize this period of history when he was a child, he surprisingly liked the literary and military officials of this era, such as Fan Zhongyan, who first worries about the world and then enjoys the joy of the world, is Fan Wenzheng. There is also the peak of Song poetry, the free-spirited and optimistic Su Shi. And Mr. Dongpa. In addition, there are also gloomy and deceased Di Qing, Sima Guang who smashed a vat to save people, stubborn Wang Engshi, and so on. Among them, the most famous is undoubtedly Bao Zheng. Although in history, Bao Zheng was not as unrivaled in solving cases as in romance, he also had his own charm, loyal lord, loved the people, righteous and upright, and since everyone had arrived, Zhao Shi thought for a moment before rolling up his sleeves and joining the search. Unfortunately, I don't know how the deceased did it either. Zhao Shihua and a group of people searched through the front yard and found the backyard. They dug 3 feet into the ground but didn't find any trace. Just when Zhao Shihua suspected that he was mistaken, suddenly Zhao Shi saw a stone that was slightly wider than his index finger and longer than his index finger. This is not uncommon. It's also highly likely that it's not a message left by the deceased, it's just it really looks like a disposable lighter. Zhao Shi looked calmly to the left and right, then moved over little by little without showing any signs of anger, and soon stepped on it with 1 foot. End of this chapter. Chapter 4 Bao Zheng. Who are you? Don't run. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4 Bao Zheng. Who are you? Don't run, step on it with 1 foot. Zhao Shi rubbed the soles of his feet. Stone, it's a stone. Then, without moving his expression, he observed from left to right, slowly bent down, and quickly grasped the stone in his hand, just as he was about to study. Zhao Xiaolang, have you found anything? Chai Wen looked over curiously. Zhao Shi shook his head and then asked back. Chai Wen smiled bitterly and shook his head. It's hard to find, and I don't know when we can. Speaking, found it. Bao Zheng, who was in his 60s, was the first to find him. Then Chai Wen's eyes lit up and he couldn't even pay attention to Zhao Shi. He took 3 steps and then ran back in 2. Zhao Shi was also a bit curious. However, on the one hand, he is a gangster and excessive participation is unwise. On the other hand, he clearly has more important things to deal with now, so he observed from a distance for a while. Seeing that the group of people were all looking down at evidence in a dirt yellow package, he turned half around and carefully took out the stone-shaped disposable lighter. Use your left index finger to touch. This is the only thing that transcends reality, even without a brain. One knows to give it a try, and the fact is indeed so. Almost instantly, the stone-shaped disposable lighter was melted by the golden light, revealing its originally pale pink appearance. Zhao Shi was breathing quickly, and if it weren't for the unsuitable environment, Zhao Shi would really want to cheer twice, but excited, Zhao Shi calmed down a bit more. Firstly, just a fire-folding advanced dance was not enough to make Zhao Shi soar to the sky. Secondly, how did the golden light of the golden finger come about? Crack the case. This made Zhao Shi frown slightly. Without a doubt, he had a preference for criminal investigation, but stop at favoritism. He finally traveled through a difficult time and didn't really want to do this kind of work. Of course, if there were any difficult and complicated cases, he was still very interested in participating. While thinking about it, Zhao Shiyu temporarily restrained his emotions, grabbed a lighter, and looked up at Yang Chuan. Yang Chuan walked this way, I took a few steps, he slapped his forehead and then retreated, forcefully pulling almost everyone's money bags down. A few reluctant constables even took their old punches before walking over with 13 or 14 money bags in their arms. Zhao Shi hurriedly bowed. Yang Chuan, however, felt a bit embarrassed and waved his hand in a guilty and affectionate manner, saying, "Brother Zhao, don't be like this. It's because I don't stand up to you, and you've helped me a lot this time. If it weren't for you, we wouldn't have missed the evidence. If we had missed the evidence, I would have been deeply responsible." Speaking, I'm going to give Zhao Shi 13 or 14 money bags. Zhao Shi evaded twice, but could only accept it. He was indeed a newcomer and needed money very much. Then he heard Yang Chuan continue, "I can't explain the evidence in the package, but I can tell you, it almost indicates who the evil thief is." "Did you specify?" Zhao Shi was slightly concerned about this and then watched Yang Chuan grit his teeth, feeling a little excited as he said, "So, we're planning to immediately mobilize people and horses to catch him, so." Zhao Shi suddenly realized then he understood and said, "Since Brother Yang has a serious case at hand, you don't need to worry about me. You just go ahead and be busy." Yang Chuan scratched his head with embarrassment and said seriously, "Don't worry, I won't forget your kindness. Whenever you come to Kaifeng Prefecture to find me in the future, I will definitely step back and greet you." Zhao Shi nodded with a smile on his face, finally able to leave. As for communicating with Bao Zheng, in the future. Not to mention that he was a gangster, Bao Zheng should also ignore himself now. The fact is that Yang Chuan even sent Zhao Shi to the entrance of the temple. If it weren't for that gust of wind, really if it weren't for this gust of wind, things might have ended temporarily. However, just as Zhao Shi was about to turn around and leave, a gust of wind somehow rolled up a piece of paper inside the package. This was one of the important proofs. Before Bao Zheng could give an order, he instinctively chased 2 pieces of paper, and before he could catch up, seeing Zhao Shi's face, immediately, just like a lightning strike, Bao Zheng was completely frozen in place. Even the important piece of evidence shook and landed before his eyes, without even moving his eyelids. It's so similar. If it weren't for Bao Zheng's 3-point rationality, he would really have thought that he had walked forward 30 years and saw the young Emperor Zhao Zhen. Click. Subconsciously, Bao Zheng took a step forward and then guessed the evidence. He almost stumbled forward and happened to step on a piece of paper rolled up by the wind. Bao Gong. The constables exclaimed in surprise, but Bao Zheng turned a deaf ear and even walked faster and faster. He took 3 steps and then rushed to Zhao Shi in front of him. It was like Wang Ying, a short-footed tiger, saw Hu Sanyang, Zhu Beiji saw Chang'e Ferry, and Cao Cao saw Guan Yu. He grabbed Zhao Shi's hand and said, "Who are you?" Zhao Shi was taken aback for a moment, then he still maintained basic etiquette, with his right hand tightly grasped and his left hand holding a bulging bag of more than 10 coins and stuffing them into one. He smiled and said, "Mr. Bao, the commoner. You can't leave." Zhao Shi frowned slightly and looked at Yang Chuan. Although Yang Chuan was somewhat wary of Bao Zheng, he still spoke up and said, "Governor Bao, you should have proven that you have nothing to do with this case, right?" Case. Bao Zheng had to think for a moment before thinking about the case, and then he didn't respond. It's okay for him to follow the case. So. After hesitating for a moment, Yang Chuan gritted his teeth and said, "Why are you holding on to the little brother and not letting him go?" Naturally. Subconsciously, Bao Zheng wanted to answer, and then suddenly regained consciousness. It was because Zhao Shi's face was too imaginative, otherwise he should not have lost his composure to this point. However, although he lost his composure for a moment, he still held his breath at the most critical moment. I can't say, even, it cannot be seen that Bao Zheng had made a decision in an instant, which was not to ask, not to speak, not to participate deeply, but to control Zhao Shi and then hand it over to the officials for disposal. The officials will do whatever they want, and he cannot be overly involved. He forced out a smile and said, "You first organize the evidence, and then discuss the case later. Say it. Without waiting for anyone else to react, he grabbed Zhao Shi and walked out. Chaiwan walked over with some confusion and asked, "What's wrong?" "How do I know?" Yang Chuan replied impatiently, then disregarded the case and just turned around to order, "Protect the evidence." He also walked out together. He owed Zhao Shi a favor, and the favor must be repaid. Chaiwan pursed his lips, after hesitating for a moment. At the same time, Zhao Shi stared at Bao Zheng's neck and pondered on something. "Can you strangle him?" Zhao Shi could never have been imprisoned, and he did not have any historical biases that could not be changed. Therefore, if necessary, he could slaughter a small portion of history books without hesitation. But are you choking to death? Leaving aside the struggle of Bao Zheng himself, it was Yang Chuan, Chaiwan, and more than a dozen captains who followed closely. This made Zhao Shi have to worry about the beautiful wish of strangling Bao Zheng at the beginning. So, since he couldn't strangle him, why was Bao Zheng? Case. Name. Do you look good? Zhao Shi was a physical intruder, so even though Bao Zheng kept a secret and didn't reveal any possible information, Zhao Shi still vaguely caught something and used it as a derivative Zhao Zhen. Zhao Shi frowned slightly. "It's not so coincidental, is it? More than 900 years apart, can it still be similar enough to make Bao Zheng lose his composure?" Bang! Zhao Shi was pushed onto the carriage by Bao Zheng, and before he could even sit down, he let the coachman drive. Zhao Shi rolled his whole body to the innermost part, and then leaned against the wall of the carriage, watching as he sat in. Bao Zheng, who had a dark face and was determined not to participate much, asked, "You say? What were the people who forced Yang Chuan's younger brother to hang himself so much? Are they watching eagerly?" Bao Zheng is not prepared to have too much communication with Zhao Shi. If it weren't for Zhao Shi's resemblance, he was even too lazy to control and report it to the officials. The officials would handle it as they wanted. However, upon hearing Zhao Shi's words, he instinctively blurted out two words. "Why?" End of this chapter. Chapter 5. Death Like an Emperor. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5. Death Like an Emperor, Why? When these two words are spoken, Bao Zheng's face turned black for a moment. He could sense that Zhao Shi was definitely in big trouble, but Zhao Shi breathed a sigh of relief and sat straight for a moment, saying, "First of all, I think you also think that Yang Chuan's younger brother died from being forced to die, rather than willingly committing suicide, right?" Bao Zheng fell silent for a moment and said with a black face, "Of course, although I don't know much about Yang Chuan's younger brother, I'm probably certain that he's not someone who would hang himself." "Why are they certain that he won't leave any evidence?" Bao Zheng couldn't keep up with Zhao Shi's train of thought for a moment, so Zhao Shi further said, "If you were the culprit, even if you forced the deceased to commit suicide, would you rest assured to let him commit suicide alone?" Bao Zheng frowned slightly, as if he understood what Zhao Shi was trying to say. Zhao Shi continued, "Since he's not at ease and he's sure to be watching from the side, how could he not doubt the suicide method of ice and quicklime? At least there must be some doubt, right?" Bao Zheng did not doubt these things, but spoke out of rebuttal. Perhaps it was a negotiation between the deceased and the murderer. "After all, I have agreed to hang myself, so it is not impossible for me to choose a relatively complex suicide method." "Yes." Zhao Shi did not deny this possibility, but said, "What if it's not?" Bao Zhengmeng trembled and then completely forgot his original intention of not wanting to communicate excessively with Zhao Shi. He blurted out, "What does that mean?" "I have no evidence." Zhao Shi folded his armor and continued, "Just guessing." "Do you think there is such a possibility?" "What? Is it that the culprit not only watched from the side, but also personally designed such a suicide method? The purpose is to not only cause lying down, to die from self-hanging in detail, but also to pass on some false or even enemy information, and then use the hands of the government to kill two birds with one arrow." Bao Zheng suddenly sat up straight. "Is there a possibility of this?" And this can more accurately explain why the killer couldn't have doubts about his complex suicide method without watching Yang Chuan's younger brother commit suicide. The problem is, you don't have evidence. Zhao Shi smiled bitterly. Yes, so, this was just a doubt, and he never thought of speaking it out. If his teacher knew that he relied solely on imagination to reason cases, he might have been shut out. However, the dark-faced Bao Zheng made Zhao Shi a bit panicked. He was eager to learn more information, so that he would impulsively throw the conclusion first. Besides, although Bao Zheng was not good at solving cases, he was also clever. He then said, if it were such a truth, the murderer wouldn't have to design such a complex suicide process. He just needed to let Yang Chuan's younger brother commit suicide normally, and leave a message in his hands or somewhere else, and we would still fall into a trap. Yes. Zhao Shi nodded and said, the killer doesn't need to set this trap more complicated, but what if we make the killer smarter? What does it mean? Bao Zheng felt like he had asked too many questions about why today, but Zhao Shi added, this is purely a wild inference, and inference cannot be considered. However, if the culprit not only wants to kill Shizhua and use Shizhua to make the government eliminate his enemies with 1 arrow and 2 eagles, but also with 1 arrow and 3 eagles. What? Bao Zheng held back for a moment and changed his questioning method. What exactly are you trying to say? Zhao Shi shook his head and looked at Bao Zheng with a seductive expression, saying, what if I were a constable under your command? Bang! Bao Zheng's scalp is tingling, following closely, even with a chill on his back. He looked at Zhao Shi coldly and said, what you said is just speculation, you have no evidence. Yes. Zhao Shi nodded and apologized to his teacher, who had the heaviest chain of evidence in his heart, before saying softly, a heart of defense is indispensable. Bao Zheng remained silent. He didn't want to believe Zhao Shi, but for some reason, after listening to Zhao Shi's words, he always unconsciously thought about it, and then seemed to have discovered some specious evidence. Today, he had some doubts about anyone. If it weren't for Zhao Shi today, if this bizarre case is solved today and evidence is found from a constable under my command, will I use him even more? Yes. Bao Zheng swallowed his saliva fiercely and hesitated for a long time as he looked at Zhao. Finally, he said, Ru Roa, if you are honest and upright, I will fight my life to the death. Say it. Bao Zheng closed his eyes like a stone carving and remained silent. Zhao Shi slightly arched his hand. If it was really what he guessed, the weight of Bao Zheng's promise would be very, very heavy. After all, like an emperor, it's never a good thing, especially for someone like Emperor Renzong of Song who had no children in his lifetime. Perhaps some people may think that this is a great blessing. After all, there is a possibility of inheriting the throne. Yes, there is a possibility, but that is when you are indeed the emperor's son, and Zhao Shi knows that he is definitely not, so what he is facing, it's almost a dead end. Why do you say that? If Zhao Zhen recognizes Zhao Shi, although Zhao Shi is not willing to have an extra father for no reason, it is definitely the only way to survive. However, if he does not recognize Zhao Shi, then his only way to survive may be permanent imprisonment, and more likely silently death. The reason is very simple. When Zhao Zhen was alive, he may have control, but what if Zhao Zhen died? Who can guarantee that Zhao Shi will not use his face to go through bloody and cholera court battles? After all, Zhao Zhen had no children under his knee. With this face on his face, Zhao Shi may not be more like an heir to the emperor than the original Song Renzong Zhao Shu in history. Therefore, whether it is Zhao Zhen or Zhao Shu, Zhao Zongshi, they will definitely kill Zhao Shi. There is no reason, they just want to kill him, unless Zhao Shi was not upright enough, so, Bao Zheng's promise was almost like risking his entire family's life. Of course, at this moment, Bao Zheng's eldest son died prematurely, and his eldest grandson died prematurely. He didn't even know that his exiled concubine, Sun Shi, was pregnant with a younger son, so he had a feeling of being alone and fearless. The carriage continued to walk unsteadily. After walking for about an hour, then Zhao Shi saw an exceptionally prosperous city. Bianliang. Of course, Bianliang was a name after the Yuan and Ming dynasties, and it is still called here today Kaifeng Prefecture, Tokyo. Bao Zheng slowly opened his eyes and looked at Zhao. He turned his head and whispered, "Go to the mansion, walk slower." The coachman replied, "Yes." Then the carriage slowed down. Zhao Shi bumped a little, squinting slightly. "What does it mean? Let me take 2 more breaths of fresh air." Zhao Shi reluctantly accepted this kindness, lifted the car curtain, and eagerly looked at the approaching Tokyo city. At this time, Tokyo had not yet experienced the shame of Yasukuni, and overall, it was still in a state of prosperity. The only regret was that, I don't know what happened in Kaifeng Prefecture. Not only was there some chaos inside and outside the city gate, but also many shacks were built outside the city wall. Zhao Shi didn't understand and asked, "What's going on?" Bao Zheng opened his eyes slightly and said, 10 days ago, there was a pouring rain in the capital. A heavy rain pouring down. In 1056, the first year of Jiao. Zhao Shi frowned slightly, and it seemed that Bao Zheng had said at the beginning that he was the newly appointed magistrate of Kaifeng Prefecture. If it were 1057 in the second year, he wouldn't have introduced himself like this. So what's going on? I remember wrong, or was history written incorrectly? Di Qing. Di Xianggong. Bao Zheng looked at Zhao Shi, but even in this era, Di Qing was still a great celebrity. Zhao Shi knew it was not surprising, so he explained a little. Di Xianggong's reign avoiding Buddha Hall was just dismissed from the position of Privy Councillor by the government a few days ago. Basically, as long as Zhao Shi doesn't ask about himself or the royal family, Bao Zheng is still quite willing to say a few words to him. After all, there will be no more to say in the future. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Who did you kill? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Who did you kill? Squeak. The carriage stopped at the entrance of Kaifeng Prefecture. When Bao Zheng looked at Zhao, he blinked and felt a bit embarrassed. However, he firmly said, "Go to Kaifeng Prefecture prison." Yes. The coachman didn't even ask, and drove to the back of Kaifeng Prefecture. There was a self-contained prison behind Kaifeng Prefecture, which didn't cover a large area but was filled with hundreds of people. Bao Zheng looked at the overcrowded prison and frowned slightly. "Is there any vacancy?" The jailer was a bit embarrassed and said, yes, it is." "Where?" "Death row inmates." "Death row inmates." Yang Chuan, who was determined to follow, frowned upon hearing the words and said, "Is there nothing else available?" Bao Zheng still hasn't given a reason for Guan Zhao, causing Yang Chuan to gradually become somewhat deliberately hostile. The prison guard smiled helplessly and said, "Yang Zhua, as you know, there was a flood a few days ago and it was really chaotic for a while. Now, not only our Kaifeng Prefecture, but also the Imperial City Office and even the Zongjing Temple are full of people, and there are still unused prison rooms." Yang Chuan looked at Bao Zheng again and wanted to ask him why he wanted to catch Zhao Shi. However, Bao Zheng didn't give him a chance and directly asked, "Is there any vacancy for death row inmates?" Prisoners are even more embarrassed. Scratching his head, he said, "Yes, there is, but the death row camp is fierce after all. Ordinary prisoners dare not be locked together with them, so there is only one bed left." Now, Bao Zheng also frowned. He thought of imprisoning Zhao Shi in prison, showing that Zhao Shi could never escape his attention, but he didn't want to torture or kill him. Zhao Shi didn't pay much attention to it. For him, if the angle remained the same and only a small change was made, the difference between being confined in the government office and in prison was not significant, and even the prison might be more interesting. Is a death row camp for 2 people? Are you still quite interested? The prison guard glanced at him and could probably guess that he was the prisoner to be locked up. However, Zhao Shi was not wearing shackles, and the second governor and left army inspector seemed to be treating him well. He didn't dare to ask too much, so he arched his hand and replied, "Yes, because death row inmates are fierce, ordinary prisoners dare not be locked up with them." Zhao Shi became even more interested. Of course, it was in the situation where he was certain that he could not escape the control of Bao Zheng that he was relatively more interested in the prison, especially the death row inmates. He had visited the prison in later generations, but never had the opportunity to meet the death row inmates, but did not expect to have an opportunity more than 900 years ago. Then let's go to the death row camp. Then the group prepared to enter and walked, spitting on Zhao Shi's pants. Zhao Shi turned his head and saw a man with a dirty and messy face, grinning and saying, "Thief, come and have fun with your grandfather." Have fun. Zhao Shi's eyes were calm, he doesn't pay much attention to provocation. This kind of provocation in later generations can't even be provoked by children, let alone Zhao Shi having the opportunity to see foreign prisons. That's what makes vulgar language fly everywhere. Just Zhao Shi's gaze shifted slightly downwards, then he clenched his fist fiercely. "Did you kill someone?" Bao Zheng was surprised, and Yang Chuan even drew his knife. The prison guard was a bit confused. "You believe this person who said they would kill?" Then he kicked the strong man against the fence, not only kicking him back, but also causing those pale and emaciated prisoners who were powerless to curse to shrink inward. He then said helplessly, "Young man, the prisoner has a bad mouth. Don't pay attention to him. He just stole something and just hit him with a few sticks." Yang Chuan slowly withdrew his sword. Zhao Shi continued to look down and saw a fine tooth mark on the opponent's left tiger mouth. His face darkened, which was quite intimidating. The strong man instinctively shrunk his neck and then said, "So what? Do you believe that I'll kill you with 3 punches when I go out? Do you think you are Lu Ji?" Zhao Shi frowned. He didn't have much desire to roast. He felt that he was definitely not a good person. But since his goal was to become a policeman, he still had a sense of justice. "Where's the corpse? What body?" The strong man asked back angrily and then looked at the prison guard. The prison guard had nothing to do with him, but he didn't quite believe that Zhao Shi could tell from passing by that he didn't know about the crime, such as murder. Does this mean he was derelict of duty? The prison guards of the Northern Song dynasty also had certain powers to investigate cases. Yang Chuan slowly drew his sword again, and Bao Zheng frowned fiercely, as if Zhao Shi was right when he said something. Bao Zheng pulled open the prison guard and asked, "Why did he say he killed someone? Look at the tooth marks." Zhao Shi looked down at the other person's tiger mouth and said, "The tooth marks are deep and dense, which can only be left after a long time of exerting all his strength." The strong man instinctively withdrew his hand and then showed it in a big way. He looked at Zhao Shi provocatively and shouted, "Your grandfather, I like to hurt myself, can't I?" "Sure." Zhao Shi smiled, but his eyes were cold to the bone. Only when he was angry, his expression would be exaggerated. "Now you can give me an identical bite." The strong man trembled. Zhao Shi's voice became even colder as he said, "The tooth marks are dense and small, which can only be left when women exert all their strength and last for a period of time." Bao Zheng glanced over with a brush, his pupils almost burning. Yang Chuan drew out his knife and walked over 3 steps in 2. He slapped the back of the knife on the strong man's shoulder and let out a scream, shouting, "What else do you have to say?" The strong man's pupils trembled and he wished he could slap himself to death while spitting at someone else before a cup of tea. However, if he didn't slap him, he would say otherwise. Admitting it, he would definitely not admit it. He gritted his teeth and said, "That's it. Where is Grandpa in the fireworks land? 300 Guan wants her to bite how she bites. How does she bite?" Yang Chuan's grip on the knife was a bit less firm. Bao Zheng also looked over with some hesitation, but Zhao Shi's coldness grew even stronger. He grabbed the other person's collar and exposed a longevity talisman on their chest, which read. Zigui was still crying in the middle of the night, not believing that the east wind would call him back. "Is this also yours?" The strong man was also stirred up with blood, his crimson eyes raised and stared at Zhao Shi. "Grandpa has been carrying it since childhood, can't he?" "No way. Zhao Shi forcefully pulled the other person in and said, because this is a marriage contract. A strong man's pupils tremble. At first, Bao Zheng didn't see what was written on it. After reciting a few words, he gritted his teeth and turned around and shouted sternly, Cheng Yi. Cheng Yi was the prison guard and said, trial. Cheng Yi didn't know much about marriage contracts, but it didn't stop him from realizing that there was a ghost in the strong man's heart. He looked at Zhao Shi with some helplessness and then approached several prison guards to open the prison door and guard his mouth. However, when he entered, he pulled the strong man up. The strong man struggled fiercely and was then kicked hard on his face, with several teeth flying out. It was obvious that he vented some of his resentment towards Zhao Shi on the strong man, and then dragged him away forcefully. After taking a few tens of breaths, there was an extremely miserable scream. Zhao Shi only exhaled a mouthful of turbid air, feeling that his whole body was much smoother. He turned his head to look at Bao Zheng and Yang Chuan. The eyes of these two people when they looked at Zhao were a bit off, especially Bao Zheng. When Bao Zheng looked at Zhao, it was like seeing a baby bump. If it weren't for this face, he really wanted to keep Zhao Shi and ask him to help clear the injustice. What a pity. Bao Zheng shook his head and sighed, then was about to continue walking with Zhao Shi. Be careful. Suddenly, at the corner ahead, a small, disheveled man suddenly appeared, holding a blood-stained stone in his hand, charging towards the few people like a killing god. End of this chapter. Chapter 7, Is it a coincidence? This is not. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7, Is it a coincidence? This is not, be careful. Zhao Shi repeated the reminder and then pulled Bao Zheng behind him. Although his strength was called public security shame by the teacher, no matter how weak, he should be stronger than an old man in his 60s, right? Well, perhaps, Zhao Shi was a bit uncertain, but this area was not just about the elderly, weak, sick, and disabled. Yang Chuan immediately welcomed him as soon as he saw it, with a fierce scar and a long sword shining, but he never thought only one facing surface. Yang Chuan was taken at a strange angle by the other side and knocked over with a stone. Grass. Zhao Shi's pupils are trembling, and your scar is actually decorations. Then he reached back to catch Bao Zheng. As a last resort, Zhao Shi didn't mind using Bao Zheng to block him, but he never thought, don't worry about me. Bao Zheng was smarter than Zhao Shi, and he had already run towards the prison guard, never giving himself a chance to drag Zhao Shi down. Zhao Shi's face darkened, but fortunately, no matter how excited his heart was, Zhao Shi always lacked a bit of synchronization on his face. This made the little man somewhat confused and cautiously chose to use his speed to dodge past him. Opportunities. Although Zhao Shi's physical ability often worries the teacher, in addition to his physical ability, he is also particularly outstanding. He bent down, lowered his head, and covered his neck with both hands. Zhao Shi ran into the other person like a bull, seeking death. Although the small stature was somewhat fooled by Zhao Shi's calm horse, it was clear at a glance that Zhao Shi had never practiced before and dared to take action. Even when a hard stone hit Zhao Shi's back of the head, bang, and hit his arm, Zhao Shi felt a pain and his heart was filled with anger, and he slammed the other person into the wall. Boom. Zhao Shi, after all, was a descendant. Although a senior professor at Public Security University who often had a strong posture and physical ability could vomit 2 tails of blood, he was actually tall and strong, especially when faced with a small stature of less than 1.5 meters. One Zhao Shi was almost equivalent to 2 other people. Bang. The little guy hit Zhao Shi with a stone again, and then he was hit by Zhao Shi again without reason. He then pressed it down on the ground, and Yang Chuan rushed over and pressed his knife onto the little guy's neck. He turned his head and looked at Zhao Shi, saying, "Do you believe me?" "Believe it." Zhao Shi nodded and decided to use his weight to hold down the small man. He grabbed his arm tightly with both hands and said, "However, maybe you can wipe the blood first." Yang Chuan felt extremely embarrassed for a moment. He really didn't expect such a disheveled and unkempt little man to have such power, and then looked at Chai Wan and several prison guards who were chasing after him closely. The prison guards had a dark face, and Chai Wan didn't necessarily feel happy. After hesitating for a moment, he bowed and said, "Thank you very much for your help, Brother Yang and Mr. Zhao Xiaolang. Otherwise, I made a big mistake this time." The prison guard wished he could bear all the blame and muttered, "What are death row inmates?" Even though they have reminded the Right Army Inspector several times, the Right Army Inspector still. "My mistake." Chai Wan was straightforward, and then he looked at Bao Zheng walking back and said, "In the death row camp, there is only one empty bed in the room where he lives. I saw that the other death row inmates had one room, and it was not impossible to squeeze them. So I thought I would rush him to another prison to squeeze him, but I didn't expect." Bao Zheng shook his head in disappointment, without much blame, but only asked, "What crime did he commit?" A prison guard quickly responded, "The Khitans are meticulous." Khitan. Fine work. Zhao Shi and Yang Chuan both lowered their heads to look at him. The small stature was a bit suffocated by Zhao Shi's pressure, twisted slightly, and snorted coldly, "Why bother to add sin? If I were really a meticulous Khitan, with these few of your dogs, who could stop me?" Yang Chuan's scar trembled with anger, but Zhao Shi didn't react much. He was indeed inferior to others in the fight, and then asked, "Aren't you the Khitan meticulous?" "Nonsense." The little one snorted coldly and sneered, "If I were to work diligently in the Khitan Empire, don't say you can't catch me anymore. You're just catching me. Do you dare to shut me down?" The song. "Bah, I see that the real Khitan people are here, and you're all left to kneel down and beg for mercy, shaking your tail and begging for mercy." Well scolded, Zhao Shi couldn't help but give a thumbs up, but besides Zhao Shi, there was actually a little bit of desire from the great Song dynasty to unify the world. Bao Zheng, especially Yang Chuan, couldn't help but slap the other person and then look at Zhao Shi. Was he wronged? "Why do you ask me?" Zhao Shi was shocked for a few seconds before returning to calmness. Looking up, he saw that Bao Zheng also looked at him with an expectant expression, as if he could do anything. However, after thinking for a moment, Zhao Shi really caught something and said, "It's not quite like what he said." As he said, "The Khitans have always been somewhat confident and fearless towards me, the great Song." Bao Zheng, Yang Chuan, Chai Wan, even the prison guards, instinctively frowned, but had to agree. It wasn't that the great Song dynasty was being bullied. During this period, the great Song dynasty was actually fine, and even had the idea of recapturing the 16 states of Yan and Yun. However, with its strong strength, the Liao dynasty was like the Tang dynasty to neighboring vassal states. It didn't bully, but it also had a natural feeling of superiority. So, it's hard for me to imagine the Khitans arranging the details inside Kaifeng Prefecture. Bao Zheng had to nod. They could still fight back and forth in the Western Xia dynasty, but the Khitans had always been an invincible presence on the battlefield. An invincible presence may have sent some meticulous work, but it probably wouldn't have been sent so deeply. Moreover, when Cheng Yi heard the commotion, Bao Zheng took the opportunity to ask, "You said he was a Khitan writer, but has there been any conclusive evidence?" This. Cheng Yi scratched his head and felt helpless. Why doesn't anything happen all year round? There are so many things happening today. Then he pulled at Bao Zheng, but he remained motionless and loudly said, "Just say it. Just say it directly." Cheng Yi reluctantly asked in a low voice again. Seeing Bao Zheng's selfless and resolute demeanor, he could only lower his volume and said almost imperceptibly, "Governor Bao, you may not be aware of this. Our previous magistrate, Kai Feng, had a relatively stable temperament." Understood, Wang Yan, this Zhao Shi really knew that he was nearly 20 years younger than Bao Zheng, but he had no passion at all. He only wanted to be smooth, peaceful, and worry-free in his life and work, and gave him nicknames Qing Feng Prefect, meaning regardless of the situation, whether it's similar or not. By the way, his granddaughter's name is Li Qingzhao. By the way, the next official in charge of Kaifeng Prefecture after Bao Zheng was Ouyang Xiu, and he didn't do much either. So Bao Zheng really didn't show any mercy to Grandpa Li Qingzhao, and of course, he couldn't possibly know this talented woman. He snorted coldly, if we can't investigate clearly, we'll arrest someone. It's really a vegetarian dish. Cheng Yi didn't dare to cooperate at all, just nodded obediently and shouted, since you're not a meticulous chitin, who are you? Why didn't you mention it when we caught you? The little man snorted coldly, obviously looking down on him. However, Bao Zheng probably made him have some good feelings and said in a muffled voice, I am a Han ethnic group from the 16 prefectures of Yanyan. I have long admired Wang Hua, so I escaped, but I never thought. He let out a deep sigh of disappointment. Bao Zheng, Zhao Shi furrowed his brows in unison. It was unknown why Bao Zheng furrowed his brows, but Zhao Shi, is it a coincidence? This is not, I made it up for myself, Ba, the identity I designed was the Han people of the 16 states of Yanyan. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. As a prisoner, why are you so excellent? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 8. As a prisoner, why are you so excellent? There's no way, although Zhao Shi couldn't be completely certain that he looked like Zhao Zhen yet, he had to prepare early. After all, being like others was fine, and not wanting to recognize anything was okay, not borrowing the other person's light. However, Zhao Zhen, as the emperor, was not capable. Zhao Shi would definitely go through countless investigations from all sides, time and time again, in order to avoid being exposed at once and falling into a more passive situation. Zhao Shi had to give up directly fabricating an identity within the territory of the Song dynasty, and instead thought of the 16 prefectures of Yanyan. I was the one who escaped from the 16 prefectures of Yanyan. If you have the ability, go investigate it. It's not difficult for you, moreover, editor, Ba, designing such an identity can also explain why Zhao Shi suddenly appeared in a dilapidated temple. As a fugitive, he stayed overnight, sleeping in the open air day and night, hiding from everyone's sight, in order not to be caught and sent back. Very reasonable. Very reasonable, just why are you also? Zhao Shi looked at the small figure under him, and his eyes inevitably flashed with a light that resembled my own death, until Bao Zheng asked with some uncertainty, how do you think? I knelt down and watched. Zhao Shi felt a bit helpless. Do you still remember my identity as a prisoner? Then he shook his head and said, we still need to investigate. There's no rush to convict before we do it again. Okay. Bao Zheng followed suit and patted Zhao Shi's shoulder, saying, with the wind of benevolence and righteousness, I remember your life-saving kindness. Then he loudly said, I don't know anyone else, but during my tenure, there must never be a prisoner who has been wrongly accused or not caught. I will give you 3 days, and in 3 days, I will start from this prison and investigate one by one. Cheng Yi and other prison guards had a dark face, but the lifeless prisoners in the prison who were too lazy to even curse with vulgar language became more lively, and some even shouted, Mr. Bao. Bao Gong, Gong, Gong is an extension of Xiang Gong. Xiang Gong cannot be used casually during this period. It belongs exclusively to the Secretariat and the Privy Council, just like Di Qing in Di Xiang Gong. Later, it gradually extended to refer to some high-ranking officials as Xiang Gong, until his wife called him husband. By the way, husband is a common term among the people in this era for eunuchs. Well, roughly, Zhao Shi is currently not involved in this issue. He is still young, and seeing that Bao Zheng has no intention of going into a big fight for a while, he directly pulled up the small man and pressed him towards the direction of the death row camp. The people around him did not feel anything was wrong for a while. Bao Zheng shook his head. If this child were not from a similar official family, he would be very suitable to be a thief. As he was about to follow, he pointed to the stone that the little man had obtained from somewhere. The stone was cylindrical and rolled away with a kick. Bao Zheng didn't care, but hesitated for a moment. He glanced at Zhao, who had already turned the corner ahead, and still bent down to pick it up. Although the small man should have been wrongly accused and seemed to have some hope, he no longer struggled to escape, and the danger was reduced. However, giving Zhao Shi a suitable tool was not bad, and giving him a suitable one was not bad either. Zhao Shi was unaware of Bao Zheng's thoughts and led the way to the death row camp under the pressure of his small stature. This place should be semi-underground, with a gloomy and humid environment. Occasionally, mice would pass directly over people's feet. Zhao Shi frowned fiercely. He is not afraid of many things, only mice dominate, or rather, it cannot be said that he is afraid, it is disgusting. This made Zhao Shi slightly regret going to the death row camp. If you don't come over, everyone will come. Zhao Shi frowned and observed from time to time that there were not many prison rooms in the death row camp. There were probably 14 or 15 rooms from one side to the other, with about 30 people locked in them. Then he walked to the middle, where one side was the prison door opening, and the other side was an old man huddled in a corner of the wall, barely breathing, like an old man who would die at any moment, along with a fierce-eyed man. The man with fierce eyes did not huddle in the corner, but instead sat against it, smashing it apart. He even pushed his head out to see the little man being taken back and laughed, in a stick of incense, time. The little one didn't even look at him. I walked into the prison room and saw Zhao walking in too. Not only did I follow in, but I also turned around and closed the prison door from inside, and naturally said, "Lock it up." "What are you going to do?" The little one was startled for a moment, then his eyes became increasingly surprised until he couldn't believe it. "Are you also a criminal?" "Otherwise." Zhao Shi shrugged his shoulders and then saw that the little one's eyes were almost bulging out. "Where are your shackles? Where is the person who caught you? Why are you so excellent, the same prisoner?" Zhao Shi temporarily ignored him. After closing the prison door for himself, he turned around and began to look at the entire prison room. The prison room was not big, but surprisingly not small, about 20 square meters. The two death row inmates lived in a completely unobstructed area, and they were quite human rights conscious, except that the beds were a bit lacking, or rather, there is no bed. The so-called bed refers to a rectangular platform left at the corner of the two side walls when digging this semi-underground prison. Then, some thatch was piled up on the platform, and a mouse curiously looked at him in the thatch grass. Zhao Shi didn't lack resonance in his heart and expression, and if he couldn't handle it properly, he would have to throw it away. He then forced himself not to look at the mouse and looked up at the window. The entire prison room only had one window, which was not small, more than 1 meter wide and more than half a meter high. Through the fence, one could see that the outside was probably flat, but unfortunately, it was not clear in the dark night. "Come here." Until now, Bao Zheng had never asked Zhao Shi's name or background. He arrived at the prison gate, waved at Zhao Shi, and openly handed the small used stone in. Then he turned around and ordered, "Go find 2 beds and bedding." Bedding. Not to mention being short, the fierce-eyed man across the street is somewhat envious, jealous, and resentful. He is also a prisoner. Zhao Shi ignored them, continuing to stare at the window. There seemed to be a black shadow flickering and disappearing outside. The little one was particularly displeased when looking at Zhao, and pursed his lips, saying, "Want to escape? The fence is buried in the soil and can't be tampered with." "Really? I don't believe it." Zhao Shi turned his head and was about to raise the bar, but Yang Chuan quickly picked up 2 blankets, opened the prison door, and handed them to Zhao Shi. Then he turned around to ask, "Prepare some meals." Bao Zheng wouldn't refuse, and he didn't really treat Zhao Shi as a prisoner. When Yang Chuan left, Bao Zheng still felt uneasy and said, "Chai Wen. My humble position is. You go call some arresters." I don't know what came to mind, but Bao Zheng paused for a moment and changed his words, "You bring some prison guards. Tonight, it will be a bit tough, and they will be guarding near this prison room." "Is this a prisoner?" Fierce eyes, small stature, looking at Zhao Shi at the same time, Zhao Shi looking at the small stature, "Do you like it? Exchange, you won't die, I'm not sure." Bao Zheng clearly knew that this was unfair to Zhao Shi, and through his interactions along the way, Zhao Shi couldn't help but be moved by his love for talent. He waited for Chai Wen to summon the prison guards and arrange for them. Only then did he take a deep look at Zhao Shi and turn around to leave. It's time to enter the palace. Then Yang Chuan returned with a food box that was half a person tall. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Waste Reuse Edition Goldfinger. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9 Waste Reuse Edition Goldfinger. The fragrance is strong and fragrant, not to mention being a prisoner. It was Chai Wen, several prison guards, and even the dying old man struggled to open his eyes, sniffed his nose, swallowed his saliva, and said, "It's really fragrant." Yang Chuan slammed away Chai Wen's outstretched hand without saying much, and directly instructed the prison guard to open the prison door. He placed a half-person high food box in front of Zhao Shi with a thud, feeling ashamed and saying, "The alum tower is too far away. I'm afraid you'll be hungry, so I only found some food nearby. Don't mind." Zhao Shi shook his head and said, "It's too grand." "It's better to be grand, don't forget, I still owe you a favor." Yang Chuan showed great gratitude and patted Zhao Shi's shoulder, saying, "When you go out, I'll invite you to Fanlu." Fanlu, also known as Fanlu, is said to be the top 72 restaurants in Tokyo. Zhao nodded in time. If it goes out, Yang Chuan didn't delay much and personally opened the food box for Zhao Shi. He couldn't help but swallow his saliva and said, "After you finish eating, rest in peace. I will also be outside tonight to take care of you, and I won't let you be in danger." Zhao Shi looked up at him. "I am very grateful for the food delivery, but there is no need for the guards, right? I seriously suspect that you can't beat me now. You have a fierce face in vain," but unfortunately, Yang Chuan clearly didn't understand Zhao Shi's gaze and thought he was pure gratitude. He whispered, "There's still wine below." He wiped his saliva and discussed with Chai Wen and others how to take care of him. Zhao Shi looked at the small man who was nearby and tore off a chicken leg, asking, "Do you want to eat?" The little man asked angrily, "Nonsense." Zhao Shi took a bite of the chicken leg and said, "Now." The little man looked at him fiercely, really wanting to give him a stone, but hesitated for 2 seconds before nodding. Zhao Shi then tore off another chicken leg and threw it to him. "Remember, this is what you asked for, not my kindness." The little one didn't expect Zhao Shi to really give it, so he quickly caught it and asked with some confusion, "Is there a difference? Just explain it clearly." Zhao Shi didn't explain much either. While eating chicken legs, he searched through the bottom layer and found the real wine. He didn't really like drinking, and drinking would make him feel difficult to calm down. However, the alcohol content of this era's wine should not be high, and it was nearly 1,000 years apart. Zhao Shi was a little curious, taking a sip. Well, very average. Although Zhao Shi thought it was average, the fierce-eyed man nearby swallowed several mouthfuls of saliva as he watched him drink. He couldn't help but say, "Little Lang, how about giving me a breath? I beg you." Zhao Shi didn't rush to give it to him, closed the lid of the wine jug, leaned against the fence, and asked, "What have you done?" The fierce-eyed man hesitated for a moment and said, "I killed a few mice in Guiyou Cave and the Kaifeng prefectural governor who colluded with them, as well as a dozen constables." "Is it really fake?" the little man questioned while secretly picking up the vegetables. Zhao Shi glanced at him but ignored him. With a flick of his hand, he threw the wine jug over, and the strong man quickly reached out to catch it. He then took a beautiful sip and said, "Thank you very much. Do you really believe it? He lied to you." The little man looked at Zhao Shi with great regret as he held the hand with the wine. Zhao Shi shrugged his shoulders and didn't pay much attention. "What if it's true? You?" The little man looked at Zhao Shi like a fool, and then took advantage of the moment when he shook his head helplessly, crazily holding a plate in his arms. Forget everything else, Zhao Shi seized the opportunity, intercepted his 2 favorite dishes and a pot of soup, and then quietly ate them. At around a moment in the hour of Su, 19.00 to 21.00, Zhao Shi had finished his own food. The little one had already finished and was eagerly looking at Zhao Shi. Zhao Shi didn't leave it for him, so he persisted and picked up the bedding, asking, "Do you want it?" The little one had already grasped Zhao Shi's temperament and nodded without hesitation, yes. Zhao Shi didn't hesitate either. He casually grabbed a bed of bedding and threw it at him. Then, looking at his own bed, the mouse would leave. However, Zhao Shi still didn't want to go, so he just shook the bedding off the fence. Dang, the stone that Bao Zheng used as a weapon for him fell out. Zhao Shi didn't think it was of any use, but he still picked it up. As soon as he held it in his hand, he was taken aback. Then he quickly turned his head to get closer to the flames outside, and carefully examined the stone in his hand. A stone is a cylinder, a corner stained with blood, then about 20 centimeters long and about 89 centimeters in diameter. This is is it a thermos? Zhao Shi happened to have caught the murderer who had killed someone before and received some golden light. He looked around and hid under the covers, pretended to be asleep, and secretly touched it with his left golden finger. Sure enough, the stone skin in my hand started to fall off, but unlike a disposable lighter that completely falls off in one go, this time the insulated cup only came to a stop halfway. This is the energy of the golden finger insufficient? Does this thermos require at least 2 fingers? Zhao Shi felt a bit frustrated when he went to the club and realized that he needed a membership card. In anger, he threw the half-relieved stone insulated cup aside and reached out to retrieve it. He carefully looked at it. Although half of this thermos is still made of stone, in general, it is still second-hand. Zhao Shi felt a bit helpless again. Upon careful consideration, it seemed that disposable lighters had also been used many times by others, but were only newer than thermoses. Therefore, these stone-like items were all waste materials that future generations may discard or even completely forget. Gradually, Zhao Shi's eyelids started to fight a bit. Although this was not his usual daily routine in later generations, today was a time of washing his hair, riding a carriage, and going to jail in the city. He was really tired and slowly fell asleep, and it was about the same time he had gone to bed, as the palace gate closed. Bao Zheng was shocked and without hesitation, he said, "Then we'll open up again." Then the several imperial guards looked at him with an expression of what you're talking about. Bao Zheng stared back and said forcefully, "Report to the officials, just say that Bao Zheng is seeking an audience outside the palace. Prefect Bao, Duke Bao, please don't make things difficult for us. What's up to you? Just report to the court tomorrow morning." Actually, it's also possible, however, Bao Zheng couldn't wait. He was also stubborn. Seeing that the imperial guards couldn't make sense, he seized an opportunity and rushed in. This was the reign of Emperor Renzong of Song. Whenever there was a new dynasty, Bao Zheng would die earlier than his eldest son who died young. The imperial guards did not expect Bao Zheng to take this action, and the old man's speed was particularly fast. He was actually allowed to break in for a while, and unfortunately, another old man happened to be speaking to the eunuch while walking out of the small door. Bang, no surprise, a few people collided together. The eunuch was startled, his face turned white and he roared angrily, "Who stabbed the duke? Why don't you capture him quickly?" However, the old man who was hit saw the person clearly in the first place, and he said somewhat helplessly, "Is Shiren going to hit the old man to death?" Bao Zheng quickly apologized, but after seeing the other person's face, he suddenly stiffened his face and only said in a muffled voice, "I'm sorry, I'm in a hurry." The other party's eyes flashed with a hint of anger, but soon covered it with a smiling face, only a bitter smile. "Shiren hit me dead. Say it." Leaving step by step, after taking a few steps, he turned around and whispered to the old servant beside him, "This killing talent never broke the rules of the palace in the past. It's so urgent today. Maybe there's something you need to ask." The old servant left. End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Elegant Blooming. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Elegant Blooming. Bao Zheng needs to make another move. Unfortunately, the imperial guards had already gained experience this time. As soon as he stepped forward, 7 or 8 hands reached out. Helplessly, Bao Zheng could only look at the unfamiliar eunuch and say, "Excuse me, the eunuch. Just say that Bao Zheng is waiting outside the palace. Go back." The eunuch Mianxing didn't lift his head and clasped his nails, saying, "The official family's dragon body is not in good condition. I can't bear the anger of you loyal ministers and admonishments." As he spoke, the eunuch also became angry and looked at Bao Zheng with a slanted eye. "Besides, it's just a matter of arguing in the court. The officials don't care. We eunuchs dare not say much, but I heard that Governor Bao is also childless. Can't you understand the officials at all?" Bao Zheng was taken aback for a moment. During the reign of Emperor Mao, 5.00 to 7.00, the officials have not yet calmed down. Is it necessary to be so angry? Isn't it that during the early dynasty, nearly half of the officials forced the establishment of a crown prince through Sima Guang's request for the establishment of a vice-governor or the use of imperial clans? Isn't this very normal? Where is an emperor without a crown prince? Besides, aren't you seriously ill? All the officials were frightened. I'm not here this time to establish a crown prince. Well, perhaps so, it's just that it's definitely different from the morning. In the morning, Bao Zheng's firepower was fully activated, almost blowing Zhao Zhen away in anger. Zhao Zhen still wanted to try to give birth to a biological son. The eunuch was surprised for a moment. "Isn't it you who jumps up and down the most joyfully in the morning? How did you change your sex?" "No, this is a strategy." Thinking of Zhao Zhen's pale face as he went down to court, the eunuch snorted coldly, "The official's dragon body has not healed yet. Duke Bao will come again tomorrow. Say it." If it were to be replaced by ordinary officials, it would be hard to say that they would turn around coldly and mercilessly. However, who is Bao Zheng? He has his own stubbornness, and as he sees the eunuch about to leave, he can't break free from it. When he's anxious, he gets angry. Clanging and clanging, Bao Zheng drew a waist knife from the forbidden army. "What are you doing?" The imperial guards instantly distanced themselves, one by one panicking. Bao Zheng turned the blade upside down, pressed it on his shoulder, and lightly cut it in, bleeding. Then he bowed heavily and said, "Old minister, please see your majesty. Do you really think that I won't kill anyone?" Inside the hanging arch hall, a face that was almost similar to Zhao Shi, but much older in age and not rosy enough, looked at Bao Zheng with a mournful expression as blood flowed from his neck. Bao Zheng kowtowed. In the Northern Song dynasty, especially in the early period of the Northern Song dynasty, kneeling was not popular, and ministers only bowed to the emperor. However, Bao Zheng did indeed know that he had passed this time, but "I have something important to announce." "What's important?" Zhao Zhen looked at Bao Zheng, then without looking back, he grabbed a porcelain and smashed it at him. Bang! "Important matter." Zhao Zhen's whole personality showed a slight loss of composure. "Is your so-called important matter forcing me to appoint a son of the royal family as the crown prince?" Bao Zheng didn't lift his head and said in a muffled voice, "The crown prince is the foundation of the country." Perhaps Zhao Zhen was really angry and blurted out, "Are you willing to let your family's property be inherited by your collateral children?" Bao Zheng remained silent. Who would be willing to give to outsiders if they could give their own son, but country? Not a small family. Zhao Zhen froze and then looked at Bao Zheng with a sinister gaze. The entire hanging arch hall was almost audible from the inside out, and Zhao Zhen was a benevolent ruler. That's right, he is the benevolent ruler who is determined by the coffin. However, he is Jun, the emperor, the one who takes life and death. Bao Zheng was sweating profusely. He is not really afraid of death, but after a few flashes of thought, he will dispel the emperor's intention to kill him with one sentence. Today, I met a 16-year-old boy. He and his majesty have a similar appearance and temperament. Zhao Zhen raised his hands. Today, I really want to kill. Then, he froze violently. even twisting too fast, and suddenly stared. "What did you say?" Bao Zheng breathed a sigh of relief. Who wants to die if he can survive? He always has something more important than death, otherwise who would want to contradict the emperor? "My dear, today." Bao Zheng recounted everything that happened today in detail, especially when it came to Zhao. He couldn't help but add a lot of subjective thoughts, such as calmness, intelligence, and a sense of justice. As for his appearance, he rarely mentioned it, only mentioning one word, image. It's really like, in particular, Bao Zheng looked closely at Zhao Zhen's speech, which was more like nothing else. Even some of his habitual little actions were identical. It was really not his own father and son, which could not be the same. Zhao Zhen. When he first heard it, he was ecstatic. It's not that he actually has a son left behind among the people, but on the contrary, he could not have left his son among the people. After all, his father, the son of Zhao Heng, the Emperor Renzong of Song, was the only adult he had. Therefore, whether inside or outside the palace, in court or below, everyone paid close attention to his every fortunate occasion. In this situation, it was almost impossible to lose the prince. However, in his life, he had hardly heard anyone talk about how your son was and how your son was. Of course, everything is uncertain. It's impossible for Bao Zheng to speak up about your son, but he can't resist Zhao Zhen's brainpower. He felt that he could perfectly embrace, and even eagerly embrace, the mentality of an old father with an adult son. If it were an ordinary person, or even an ordinary royal family, it would be hard to deny it. However, after all, Zhao Zhen was an emperor, even if he wanted his son to go crazy. So, next came the frenzy of suspicion, whose family's conspiracy. Xia, Liao, civil and military officials, or the Chai mansion of the previous dynasty and the Zhao Kuangyin lineage of this dynasty. There's no way, the throne, the 9-5 sovereigns, the co-ruler of the Song dynasty, for this position, no matter what means people use, any planning is actually normal. Therefore, in the end killing intent, he is already old and not in good health. With the certainty that it is impossible for the prince to be left behind, he can no longer withstand too much trouble, so he killed him, the most convenient. Fortunately, Bao Zheng said an extra sentence. I have no children under my knee, and I suddenly felt a love for licking a calf. My. Zhao Zhenshu stood up and said, take me to see. In a moment Jia Mansion Jia Changchao looked at the old servant and exclaimed in disbelief, has the official family left the palace? He had just met Emperor Zhao Zhen not long ago, and without mentioning Zhao Zhen's anger, he was already unable to eat. His body did not support him to wander outside the palace. Why? Jia Changchao asked the old servant this question, but it was obvious that he had not thought about getting an answer. He just frowned and pondered, but he never thought about it. The old servant pondered for a while, unsure, and said, I don't know exactly why, but Bao Zheng is. Palace gate bleeding. Unexpectedly, Zhao Zhen left the palace and Jia Changchao was surprised but not so surprised. Bao Zheng was bloodthirsty, but he suddenly stood up in shock and paced back and forth before finally sitting back. Although Bao Sha likes to forcefully report, he rarely gives advice. It must be something big happened, but what is it? No, you can't be in a hurry, just wait and watch. Then he looked at the old servant and asked, did anyone else see what happened today? The old servant shook his head and said, not many, I only come across them nearby. The servants of several high-ranking officials, including Wen Yanba, Fu Bai, Councillor Lu Gang, Chief Minister Wang Yaochen, Deputy Chief Minister Wang Daong, and Minister of the three departments Han Qi, were under the command of the Secretariat. Jia Changchao looked at the old servant in a secluded manner, wondering if you had a problem understanding the words, not much. Then he let out a long sigh and said, the court is in turmoil, and I always feel a bit uneasy. I don't know what might happen. Who knows? The old servant, relying on his unwavering loyalty, couldn't help but be a bit careless in responding. He pinched his thigh and lost his mind, saying, I'm so tired. When will I be able to sleep? Sleeping is not comfortable. Zhao Shi almost woke up every now and then, finally falling asleep and being slapped by someone. When he woke up, he saw a disheveled and dirty face. Subconsciously, he pinched half of the petrified thermos he was holding in his arms and looked at him disdainfully. "Take a knife, you're not even my opponent." Then he pointed to the other side and said, "Someone's dead." Zhao Shi instantly woke up, struggled to sit up, turned his head to look, and saw to show a disdainful expression. It was as if there was an air leak, and the dying old man had fragments of a wine jug stuck around his neck, sucking blood out of the peaceful passage of time. End of this chapter.